helping brands maximize the value of their sponsorships and create more engaging experiences. This is the Market Share Sports Podcast.
Hey, welcome back to the Market Share Sports Podcast. We've been real excited lately about the feedback we've been receiving from folks inside the sports marketing community. Thank you for listening and for telling your friends. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or from wherever you pull your podcast. Our guest today is our good friend Chris Mathieu. Chris is the Executive Vice President of Corporate Development and Strategy for the Queen City Soccer Club. We talk about the state of soccer in the U.S., team sponsorships, and Chris's unique journey to the U.S. and his current career. Enjoy. All right, man. Good to have you in our studio. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely a pleasure.
This was fun.
Yeah.
And I will, for the folks who are listening, I'm a little bit of intimidated having you on here because of the two of us, you do bring the absolute best radio voice. I'm going to do the best I can to talk from my diaphragm the whole time we're talking today and try not to get nasally with it, but fun having you on.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it, Jim.
So good stuff. Hey, man, we start every podcast the same way. I got a question for you. So I'll put you on the spot.
Yeah.
If you had an opportunity to sit down with anyone who is alive today, who would you choose to sit down with?
That would be the three actually. So I have to pick one of the three, right? So
you could tell us who all three are, and then you can elaborate on one.
Well, so definitely.
And don't say your wife. We know that one, so you're not going to get in trouble for not choosing her.
No. Definitely Nelson Mandela. Would love to have a day in the life, with Nelson Mandela. I think the other one, would be Robert Nesta Marley. Be interesting to see, just from a musical standpoint, just his roots, perspective. But yeah, he's got a global brand, a global piece of music. So those would be two. And then if I could go back in time, honestly, the third would be my dad.
Yeah.
If I could catch up with him, not having spent much time, but yeah, it would definitely be Pops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you hit on a couple of things, and I think it leads to, because I and our friendship, as we've known each other over the years, you've got a great story on how you got here, and Mandela kind of plays into that a little bit, and obviously the time you didn't have with your dad because he was living overseas and you were here later on in his life. Anyway, talk to me a little bit. For those who don't know you, let's talk about how you. And by the way, those are three great answers. I love the Bob Marley brand, and it's just kind of, I couldn't name one song.
Yeah.
But I'd recognize him if you walked in the room, type
absolutely.
thing, right?
Yep.
Let's talk about your story. Chris, you currently are the Executive Vice President of Corporate Development and Strategy for the Queen City Soccer Club, and we'll talk about that role and who they are and those kind of things. But talk about just a little bit, kind of where you've come from.
Yeah. So the background. My parents are both Indian. I was born in Kisumu, Kenya. I have two older brothers who were also born in the same village in Kenya, but grew up in Southern Africa. So my dad spent probably a total of 40 to 50 years in Kenya, in Africa, half of which was in Kenya, half of which was in Zambia. Probably grew up in Zambia, spent most of my growing, years in Zambia. That would be from, the age of 2 or 3 till I was 13. And then 4 years in Botswana. So, South Africa and Southern Africa, very, very familiar with. I traveled to probably over 33 countries before the age of 16. Thanks to Dad. He loved to travel, so every vacation year we would drive to one African country, and then every 3 years he had the opportunity to fly with a paid vacation anywhere in the world. So having to do Europe, the Far East, Asia.
What did he do for a career?
He was a civil engineer.
Okay.
So in that period of time, which is the 50s and the 60s, in Africa, which was colonial Africa at that time, Kenya had just gained its independence in 1963. He was responsible for building bridges and roads. So the village we were born in was located on Lake Victoria, which is on the western part of Kenya.
Okay.
And so he'd be responsible for building, roads out north to Kericho and then to Mombasa. So that's where he started. Then in Zambia, he was working in the copper mines, which we were on the northern province, the Copperbelt province at the time. So, but if people ask me how would I describe my dad, I'd compare him to a frontiersman. His hands were shaped like that, built like that, raw, stubby, hard. Just a guy that refused to accept no for an answer, and he was a bull in a china shop.
Nice. And you've inherited some of that as well. That is what we'll get into. You I know later retired, went back to India.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
And your mom's still there.
Yes, retired in '88. Went back to India. Had bought himself a piece of property, designed and built his house, and lived pretty comfortably based on the fact that his pension, came from the UK, and so based on the currency exchange rate, for £1 you get 60 to 70 rupees. So, yeah, he lived like a king, comfortably while he was there. But he also he passed away in '88, debt free. So that was one of his goals. Didn't want to have any debt, but really grateful to him for the opportunity and the global experience he planted in us.
Yeah.
So
you growing up in Africa, but when did you come to the States?
So just to before I answer that, one side note. So I went to boarding school in Botswana in the capital Gaborone. So in 1979, my dad sent me to a boarding school there, partly because the education system where we lived in Zambia wasn't up to par, and through a relationship he had with one of the faculty members there, sent me. Which I call it out because that was probably the best education those 4 years I ever had. Maropula was a school started by a former British military soldier, Dean Yates. He and his wife were missionaries in Botswana at the time and started the school in 1972. And the goal of the school was to provide the highest level of education to the smartest kids, rich or poor. The goal also was to then, offer scholarships to 50% of its student population that couldn't afford school, but showed absolute, expectations to succeed and excel. Yeah. And so I got there in '79, which, the school was still very young, from '72, '79. And that was, for me, being an Indian in an African environment amongst students whose student population were, probably say, 80% African and 20%, other, meaning European, American, and Indian or Asian. But the experiences were great. You had to, students were involved in cleaning the school. From landscaping to classrooms, once a week. The entire school, Friday was taken off to clean the school. Every Wednesday, the school shut down to take food to a village called Habani, and we were broken up into groups where we would teach English, math, take care of the senior citizens in that village, and then a time of play. But we transported food, cooked food for the village, and they've been doing that ever since. So, planted in you a certain discipline and appreciation, because it brought a certain sense of community at a very early age for me, and then also being able to interact with kids from different parts of the world, and learn about politics, communicate. Friday night, there's not much to do, so it was debate night. And so the whole school was in a environment, where debate night was seniors versus juniors, fourth years versus third years, and you were given a platform, a topic, and go defend. And it brought great, opportunity to listen, to learn, and So yeah, and I say that because that then led me to the Stony Brook School on Long Island, New York. And I was very comfortable, very happy living, going to school in Botswana. I came home and my dad surprised me by saying, "Hey, here's a plane ticket, 4 days, you're heading to New York." Now, how that came about was there was an American family living down the road from us, whose son, Pepper, I grew up with. And Pepper's mom convinced my dad, yeah, it would be really good for me to go to New York. And so that's how I ended up on Long Island. And somebody did not convey to my dad what the weather was like in January landing in New York, because I came off the plane in a pair of shorts and like a cotton sweater.
Nice.
Yeah. So it was definitely a culture shock coming off that plane. Yeah.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I was wondering if he had not been to New York, so he had no real concept of.
No, the weather where we were in Zambia.
Back then, you couldn't Google it. So
you couldn't. Yeah, no. Back then, where we were was temperate climate, so it never got below 65, never got above 80, no humidity. It was like perfect weather all year round, and so. I don't know whether he assumed that was the weather everywhere in the world, but let me tell you, it was a shock for me.
So you go to Stony Brook, you end up, you go through college, and how'd you get your career in sports? Where we end up with that?
Yeah, so again, this total 180-degree turn, going from an all African environment to an all American, all predominantly white environment, and in a prep school on Long Island, where special breakfast for us in Gaborone, Botswana on a Sunday was cereal and scrambled eggs. Special breakfast at Long Island, the prep school, was this buffet of assortment of everything. Mm-hmm. You're going from, kids that had nothing and we wore uniforms to you can wear your own clothes, and kids are driving up in Porsches, Mercedes, and what have you. Just a very different culture. So I wasn't really prepared, honestly. I wasn't prepared academically. I did enough to graduate, and that's about it. But then had a small tickle of a scholarship to Calvin College out in Michigan for D3. But then from there on, honestly, it was a very challenging time for me, not having a support system, no family, and didn't really know how the system worked academically, and just kind of loved soccer, and soccer was really what carried me through.
You were playing soccer for Calvin?
Yeah. I was recruited, played 1 year, but then just did not make that transition into college. So left, went on this journey for about 9 years, where I probably worked every manual job under the sun, from delivering pizza to landscaping to machine shop to construction, just to get by. Yeah. But then came to a real milestone in 1991, but leading into it was just a spiritual rebirth, if you will, and then got fired up about what I wanted to do, how I wanted to do it. And international sports management was what I wanted to pursue. Yeah. Came back to Long Island, attended the SUNY Stony Brook there, and while I was there, interned for a gentleman named Greg Economo, who was the associate director of external affairs at Stony Brook. Yeah. And really, that's where sports it kind of launched, because I ended up working for Greg, I think, over the course of 10, 12 years through 3-4 different companies, starting with SME through Brand Think. And but boy, what a journey. Great leader in terms of Greg, great mentor. He and Ed O'Hara, who owns SME Branding, both of them, to me, were critical in just allowing me some latitude while working for them, to be given a blueprint to develop systems, processes within the organization, and turn it around where We were going from revenue of $1 million and change to being acquired by SFX Sports. So yeah, that was essentially the journey. But I tell you, for those out there that are looking for mentors in the business of sports, and you need to really tie yourself to people that really can give you that platform to excel and succeed. And both those gentlemen gave me a really wide berth to allow my blueprint and fingerprint on their business. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah,
for all they've done.
That's awesome. That's a great compliment to both of them.
Yeah.
Now I do have to say, when we met, you had been through working with those guys, and Greg had come to NASCAR Media, right? Was he at NASCAR Media?
No,
or
Greg,
you broke away at that point, or that?
Yeah. So Greg was at that point he was with Brand Think. He had moved from New York down to Charlotte. He was getting a lot of business at that time with DEI, and a lot of working there. So the agency Brand Think was growing. I tried to convince my wife to move when the offer was made to Charlotte, North Carolina at the time, but we made the decision because her family was still in New York. She decided, we decided, okay, no, I'm not going to make the move. Yeah. However, because we made the decision to stay with family, 3 months after that decision to stay in New York, her sister decides to move to Florida.
I was just going to say, I bet the family moved.
Yeah. And then 3 months after that, her parents said, we're going to follow them to Florida. So I asked her, I said, why do we stay? and then I had the opportunity, through Greg. I think he was on the way home he was on the way to Charlotte from New York after the banquets, and was sitting next to Jay Abraham, who at that time was CEO for NASCAR Images. They were looking for somebody to come in on an account management side with Sprint. Greg mentioned my name, and then came up here for an interview. Came down here for an interview, and absolutely loved it. And then said, "Yeah, we're going to base our moving on what is best for the family."
Yeah,
and it was a good decision.
So NASCAR Images, later NASCAR Media Group, and then went back to New York.
Yes.
For a year, right?
Correct. Yep. So at NASCAR for over 8 years, loved it, and people. Very challenging in the sense that people would say, well, why NASCAR? And I share with people, and I've always told them, is one of the decisions was because I felt like the company had shared values, a really good work ethic, good people, fair, and then the opportunity to succeed. And I felt like those were really good attributes for me to come in at that time, and it did. I couldn't have. I was absolutely ecstatic working for NASCAR Media Group, and then but the opportunity arose to take a position as a vice president for Madison Square Garden in the partnership strategy group, and it's an opportunity that comes once in a lifetime, and. Right. Moved, thought I could make the transition back to New York. I didn't move the family up. I was commuting back and forth. But after a year, it was very clear that the transition to New York was not going to happen. Yeah. And New York, look, it was a great company, great opportunity, best-in-class brand, best-in-class in all that they do. Yeah. From a venue standpoint, 411 events in 365 days. They're clear leaders across, and the executive team was absolutely stellar. From at that time, Scott O'Neill, Greg, Ron Skotorzak, and a slew of others. But yeah, but made the decision to resign and move back to the family. Partly because also you're talking about a schedule that would have 41 Ranger games, 41 Knicks, 12 on the Liberty and the sports properties. It can get an hour and a half
concerts
commute.
and
Yeah,
everything else.
yeah. You can, and the commute tied in between. It's a long day, and having been in North Carolina and quality of life being more important, I made the decision to step back.
Yeah, this is good, and we're glad you did. You got from there. You did some stuff with in the agency realm around content generation, and before we get to the soccer program, if I think back as you're laying that out, there's about 12 years of really begin to formulate who I know you to be, and that guy is a great storyteller, right? And the ability to leverage content to drive value for sponsors and partners and properties, and talk a little bit about your kind of, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 just bullet points on how you view the importance of content in this content crazy generation we're in. I mean, it's kind of...
Yeah, so the first dabble obviously with NASCAR images and dealing with content, and also just having a direct relationship with Sprint, and then their agency, motorsports agency Octagon, and just why content is important. And so over the course of 8 years, trying to understand the role of content within the business strategy, then brand strategy, and then finally experiential. Why it's important, what's relevant about it. And so created this, using NASCAR as a litmus test, created this little formula for myself that I applied in principle to anything that I tried to, sell. And in doing so, the formula continued to work. And so in that journey, it became more relevant because the question was, I asked myself is, how do I help NASCAR at that time? How do I help with selling more content? And then, with that, you get 90 no's to every 100 requests. You get 90 no's, and then so why no? And then kind of drilling down in on the no's till I figured out that journey from going, to having people champion your brand to generating revenue. That journey of consumption behavior and how can you maintain a strategy for it when generations are changing the way they consume and the speed at which it's coming at you. So I've got 3 kids, right now 19, she turned 20 May 1st. So
they're aging fast.
Yeah, 20, 16, and 14, and we cut the cord in the house about 12 years ago. Decided to make the internet the sole source of entertainment and community around the house. So watching them with their devices and how they consume content, where they're comfortable watching snippets, snackable content of Jimmy Fallon on YouTube and Snapchat filters. So their behavior and how they consume content was kind of a guide for me as to how we should position content as a business or for sponsors itself. That then evolved into a really solid formula, in my opinion, that content strategy is here to stay. But it's going to evolve and iterate. The question for businesses is, are you nimble enough and adaptive enough to change your business strategy to generate revenue regarding content? And I think that's a hard question because, again, the cost of technology, the cost of software applications, the cost of intellectual equity of people that understand how to do it. That's a challenging task in and of itself. But again, you look at the retail, and you're familiar with this in the retail business, the number of stores that are closing because relevancy isn't there, loyalty, the no purchase motivation, and they're shutting down stores.
Yeah.
And that's on a huge scale. Yeah. So
what do you think it is about, I think I know, but you mentioned 90 no's for every 100 pitches on content strategy. What is the biggest challenge companies have to overcome to really get all in? Because I would say that too. You can't just dabble in it.
Yeah.
Right? When you can test some things.
Yeah. But
at the end of the day, you got to move. You got to go all in on.
Correct. And I think honestly, it starts with the business strategy and the leadership, right? So you get into decision makers that you need to have them say yes to the budget. And from their side of the table, they're looking at it, how's this going to help me move product? What I think sometimes the challenge is the journey that takes place between, content and revenue. And that journey is something that I think, I've honed in on, but trying to get to decision makers to explain how this is going to move revenue and the need for content is the biggest challenge, because honestly, sometimes people are tactical, where I can't see through how this is going to move more product for me. Yeah. So the comparison I say is, look, if Lowe's is on the 48 and you're hurling around the track and there's a guy in the stands that's wearing a 48 T-shirt, that's great. But how do I get the guy in the stands to purchase more product from Lowe's? Mm-hmm. That's content. Mm-hmm. Bringing those two together is going to be through content. How he consumes your brand, how he watches it, how he navigates through it, purchases, how you connect to it. That's how he's going to buy more product from Lowe's. Right. But I think the hardest part for leadership today is understanding that journey internally within an organization, because that's a challenge in and of itself, and then externally as well.
Now, I would say we all know you get what you measure, right?
Yeah.
And what we deal with on the retail side is so many people, they're getting pressure for every penny. Where's the ROI? And because there are so many things you can measure, they have a bunch of things that'll keep their job, right? If I do this,
right,
then I'll measure either impressions, or I can measure, sometimes dollars, direct dollars that come back from making these decisions. When I have to think about a longer term, and I think that's probably the other challenge of it, the longer term play on a content strategy, sometimes it's risky, and people are averse to risk, and it creates some challenges on that. Mm-hmm. But a lot of missed opportunities, though, but people not really embracing the need for good storytelling with their brand.
Yeah. And, nowadays, if you look at trends or data of consumption behavior, there's an emotional branding connection that people aren't reaching out or in marrying. Brands aren't doing that, right? So I think now that they're honing in, I think you've got brands that are bringing in-house production staff and recognizing the importance of it, creating their content. There's some missteps as well, but they're definitely a missed opportunity, because my kids, my youngest is 14. He's 5 years from now, how does he consume content when he's out of the house? The way he marries, because again, we don't have TV, so it's not going to be programming. We have Netflix. We've got YouTube TV, and that's the model. And then they have the devices, so they're going to be connected, regardless. But how are we meeting them where they are?
Yeah. Well, let's kind of jump a little bit over to let's talk about your current role with the Queen City Soccer Club, and specifically, let's talk about kind of where we are as a nation. I do think it's great. I wanted to get your story out there. I want to get people to know you. I think it's a great story of. I think anytime you said I got off the plane in shorts and a light sweater in New York in January, I think it's and probably not a whole lot of money in the pocket, and it's always a good story. You're working for a soccer organization, or let me ask you this: who is Queen City Soccer Club? Why don't you tell us that?
Yeah, so Queen City Soccer Club is an event management company, and so the goal for the event management company is to start building properties under its portfolio. So currently we own the Charlotte Independents, which is the professional soccer team playing in the USL. We operate and manage the Charlotte Hounds, which is the Major League Lacrosse team. And then just recently, and we will as of May 5th, Jack's House is going to be part of it, which is going to be a soccer bar and retail store, which is going to be in the office. Okay. So that's we're an event management company. The goal potentially is to get a select number of dates and produce whether it's single day events, but in a multitude of sports. So it can go as wide as I'll say hurling, to rugby, to showcases, but it's the spectrum of sports that we think Charlotte has an appetite for and to build on.
Yeah, good stuff. Let's talk about the independents. Kind of break down there. I will recommend people go to your website, to the Charlotte Independence website, and read the story of Jack's House. We can talk about that a little bit, but how that name and the character kind of associated with Charlotte. Something that was a good read. Talk about soccer in the U.S. Where are we?
Yeah,
as a nation, our MLS programs seems to be a lot of competition for more franchises. Kind of where would you?
Yeah. So great question, and part of there's two parts to answer that question. One is soccer is my second love. Right? My first being Christ and faith, and then but soccer is absolutely close second. And absolutely grew up with the sport in Africa, where the passion points are off the chart, off the scale. Played it locally, grew up with it. I mean, I played 4 to 6 hours a day till I was 16, and just nonstop. And then read about it, absorbed it 100%, and then came to the U.S. in 1983 off the plane in shorts and soccer.
In the soccer desert.
Yeah.
There was nothing.
Yeah. I mean, in the dorm on weekends, I would holler, hey, anybody want to play soccer? And it'd just be like radio silence, nothing. Anybody want to play football? And then everybody perks out, hey, let's go. So definitely not on the landscape. It wasn't even on television programming. I had to walk to the library, just to get scores and updates, and even that was a hit or miss because they didn't have the papers, didn't cover anything. They had the indoor soccer league, they had NASL, but I wasn't interested in those leagues because the quality I felt wasn't there compared to what I've been used to. Mind you, even in Africa, in Zambia, we got worldwide leagues. Mondays was say the English Premier League. Tuesdays we would get Italian. Wednesdays we would get German. Thursdays South American. So there's this, and then Fridays was local. And so there's absolutely access in watching the best in soccer, and then turning around and playing for yourself. So now, where have we come since 1983 to now? I think it's absolutely evolved. It's grown bigger. But I will say that we're not there yet. Obviously, we didn't qualify for the World Cup.
Well, I was going to ask you about the impact of that.
Yeah,
where you think
huge disappointment, right?
Yeah.
Huge disappointment. But it's a reflection of the problems and challenges that the U.S. has from the club level at the grassroots, from recreational through club, through high school and college, into the pros and even MLS, is that we may have a lot of talent, but it's the direction of that talent, coaching process. Like the U.S. soccer has a brand in and of itself to play. We've got to find out what that brand is.
Yeah.
The Brazilians have their own brand of play. Italians do, and every country in the World Cup has a brand of play, and we have to settle on that. What is it that we want to be, and how do we want to play? In my opinion, when we talk about speed of play, which is a big one, if at the highest level at World Cup, I'll say if it's 120 miles an hour is the speed of play, I don't think we have the players at the highest level in the United States playing at that speed of play. And so when you put a group of players that need to compete and win, playing, players that played every day, that's the challenge, and it's reflective. I mean, we couldn't get out to qualify. That's one, and oftentimes, we have a challenge internationally when we play European squads, South American squads, just the speed of play, and then technically as well. So, for example, when Germany lost the Euro in 2002, they went and made a commitment of, I think, over $75 million to develop a strategy, for them to win. And so they culled their entire youth platform and program and culled away 8 and 9-year-olds into a system that eventually what do? They won the World Cup, and the champions. So that group of 8 and 9-year-olds, it can't happen, it can't succeed, and it can't work if everybody's on the same page. We don't have that. The structure is so fragmented as to what's coming down from U.S. soccer to what's going up. There are a lot of dads coaching, nothing against dads coaching, but in principle, the technicalities, if we're not building players where by 8 or 9 we're not recognizing the talent in those individuals to pull them out, we're late. By the time they're 14 and 15, you can't expect them to now play at that speed of play.
When you identify those players now, are there easy programs to funnel them into? I think the answer is no. Yeah. But I think of the IMG academies, of course, significant cost, and I know there's ways to get in there if the talent's right. But really, aside from that, are there programs, or is it just kind of, hey, once you get to high school, then we can kind of start really looking at you type thing? Or
I think that's the case. It's the high school and collegiate program that right now have the biggest opportunity for playing on the national team. You look at Pulisic's story and narrative. I think he was coming out of a club, Hershey, Pennsylvania, and then got picked up early, but that's an exception. It's not the norm,
right? And
we need to make that the norm for the United States.
Talk to me about the independents and Queen City Soccer Club. I mean, what's your role in that? How do you see your role, the USL, the league, and kind of how are that second tier level with?
Yeah. So if we're talking about growth of soccer in the United States, I think the United Soccer League USL is one of the best platforms. It is very high level professional game at a very local level, and so that's one thing I'm going to come back to. Yeah. So my role currently at the Queen City Soccer Club is the Executive Vice President, Corporate Development Strategy. So grow the brand. Build the brand, grow the brand. And that's on two sides of the coin. That's one operationally, internally, and then externally as well, building relationships out. And so we developed a vision out of that. A vision we agreed to that has 4 pillars. One, we want to create experiences at our events. And those experiences have to then turn into relationships where people trust our brand based on the experiences they've had. And then once we have those experiences, is convert them into partnerships, and partnerships then into community, and where they're investing in our brand, and it's also a culture, right? So everywhere else in the world, you look at the fan base, they don't have everywhere else in the world, teams have been there for 100 years or more. Nobody moves teams. Nobody moves locations. Liverpool will not move.
I was going to say, you showed up in a Liverpool jacket today, so yeah.
That's right. Yeah, nobody moves. And I think so my role with the independents is, let's build a brand here. Let's grow the sport from the grassroots system up. Let's tie into all the relevant stakeholders to help grow the base and sport. Mm-hmm. Now, we can get 60,000, 70,000 fans coming to ICC event to watch some of these international teams. Great. Shows that there's a base out there. However, when you can't fill the current professional league stadium with the same folks, then what's the challenge and why? And so that's where we look at what does it mean to be a fan of soccer, and how. I look at fans and how they support their teams. You go to football games, and fans obviously know when and how to support a team. When the crowd gets involved, when the team's behind. Same in basketball and baseball. I think other cultures have defined it. If you again, I'll use Liverpool as an example. They in the road to the finals, they had to go through Porto, a team in Portugal. When they won that game, the fan base at games were singing this one song repeatedly, Anfield Road. From Paris to Turkey, we've won the lot. So they come behind the team, reiterating that song over and over and over again. And you watch from the quarters, through the games that they played through to the final. That's all they've been chanting is Anfield Road, and that's the fan base recognizing where Liverpool's history and heritage was, winning 5 European championships, and this is where we belong. This is where we need to be, and just reminding them we have to build that culture here in Charlotte. We need our fan base to know when to start chanting, coming in, when to pick the team up, and Henry Kalungi, who's one of our players, was on a podcast and was asked about the fan base, and he said the best example he said is, look, it's like a child. You have to good or bad moments that the child has, either way you have to love them, and that love and support has to be shown. And the same with independence. It's not about the record. Win or lose, come out, support your local professional soccer team, and then here's why. So we want to build on that vision, extend it, build deeper relationships in the community, but we're here to stay and we're here to grow. And soccer, based on trends that I've looked at, specifically to Charlotte, one, you're trending up on the diversity of population coming into the city of Charlotte, which means soccer is going to be more adaptable and adoptive than other sports, which is good for us. And then we also are looking at the fact that the valuation of soccer is increasing year to year. So it's a good thing for us. So that's my role. So on the second part of that is MLS and Charlotte. MLS is the highest level of soccer, obviously, in the United States. They currently have 24 teams, looking to grow that out to 28. Charlotte put a bid in last December. Were unsuccessful in that bid, and then you have to kind of take a seat back and say, okay, what's the evaluation now? Where does the growth of soccer lie? Atlanta just came out, and Atlanta have a phenomenal story with a new stadium. They're packing it, 70,000 plus.
It's amazing too, because they've never been the best sports town.
Yeah.
Growing up in this area, but
keep
going.
And Cincinnati too, right? So you look at Cincinnati, you look at the Reds, you look at the Bengals, and then you look at FC Cincinnati, which is also be going to MLS. But those two locations have not been the best in terms of sports. But people will tell you differently, obviously, from Atlanta. But with MLS and Charlotte, the challenge was, I think, a venue. Not having a venue that we could lock into. However, I think underlying both is that how many more teams can be added to MLS, even if it's at 28, which would probably be a very, very, it's probably the largest league. I mean, in the EPL has 20. So 28, and how many more can be added onto that, and how many divisions can be created, and will that spur growth? Well, those are, right now, let's say 24 teams, those are 24 markets. The United States is a really big country with a lot of soccer in it. And then I compare that to the United Soccer League, which is a professional soccer league, which 33 markets. The franchise fees varies, right? USL, it's $5 million, I think, as of today. MLS, I think you're looking at a franchise fee of $350 million. How many people do you have out there that can pay $350 million for a franchise fee? And how do you get to that and negotiating that? Are there 10 more locations out there that are willing to pay? Then you also have this, which I think is a little bit of a black eye, is the potential Columbus Crew being relocated to Austin. Like I said, everywhere else in the world, teams don't move.
Right.
You're rooted. Your roots are deep, and so that does not bode well, in my opinion,
especially for one of the original franchises.
Correct.
In a non-traditional professional market.
Absolutely agree. So I think for the USL, there's really a lot more growth. I think you can have a lot of people that can come together to put a $5 million franchise fee on the table right now and grow those markets, which are mid-markets. So you're talking about cities that have less than 2 million in population, and there are lots of them. And you can build platforms and programs, and there's revenue that's there available for everybody. We happen to be in a very, very competitive city in terms of sports.
Yeah.
You've got NASCAR, you've got the Panthers, you've got the Hornets, you've got the Checkers, you've got Knights, you've got UNCC football, you've got the Hounds, and you get Independents, and you've got clubs that also take a big chunk of sponsorship money. So it's a very competitive landscape from a sponsorship dollar-wise, but I think there's a lot of growth for USL. It's easier to grow from the ground up than I think trying to, plant an MLS city and then try to grow it.
Yeah.
So
let me go back a little bit, and there's a lot of stuff, some things I want to cover. I don't know if we'll get to today, but one of the things that I liked how you laid out the responsibility of kind of an expectation of the fan. But I know it's not just, hey, you gotta act this way with the experiences. The role you're playing with the team to actually create those experiences, as you said, develop into relationships and partnerships that develop into community. Sitting on the agency side of the desk over here, I mean, you can't really ask for more when you take a client to a property than to run into a property who understands the responsibility they have to create a product and to create an experience and relationships with fans and those things as you laid it out. Talk about, I don't know, just expand a little further on that role. And, I'll say this, with our clients, and I've actually written some stuff here recently, I tell sponsors now, our clients who are looking to sponsor properties, you're on your own, right? I mean, for the most part, as refreshing as it is to hear you lay out that vision for the property, we still run into a lot of it. There's a lot of signage that needs to be sold. There's a lot of the revenue targets that have to be hit from salespeople, and there continues. Properties have very lean staff when it comes to the front office, right? And so you can't nurture. You can only go so deep with your sponsors. Right. Yep. You pick a few that you can get a significant investment in, you invest in them, and the rest of us are sometimes we have to just figure out how to make it work. So I kind of always expect to come into a property with that mindset that we're on our own. We have to create the ROI. We have to do all the activation. We have to be prepared for that, and we accept that. So when you run into a property who lays out that we understand we have to create an experience for you, and then the benefits that come from that, that's refreshing to me. And so it's good to hear some of that. Talk a little bit of some of the things you guys are doing. You're in a great facility in southeast part of Charlotte, out in the suburbs.
So if soccer being the global sport it is, you can appreciate it where you can go to an Atlanta and be part of 70,000 fans, absolutely phenomenal, right, every day. But the intimacy of the sport is tied to stadium-specific sizes and proximity to the action in the game. And I think soccer fans are attuned, to that reach and proximity to the sport. And the Matthews Sports Center Matthews is a great venue size for it to be very personal, where players can come up and engage with the fans. They're accessible, available, and I think the groundskeeping crew, Preston Buckman and Winston specifically, have done an absolutely phenomenal job with the grounds. That field, that grass field, is the best. We watch USL and other cities, and I can tell you, absolutely top 3, top 4. But they do a phenomenal job maintaining it and giving the players, a surface that is absolutely beautiful to play on, and motivate. So it's a little out in the suburbs, but it's a great venue. We're building it out to 5,000 seats, from 25 to 5,000 seats, and we hope to have that by June. And then we now need to fill it. But it's creating a culture. It's creating some traditions within the fan base. So come in early. Don't come 10 minutes before the game, sit and then leave. Come in a little bit early experience what's around you. Talk.
What
to
do you
the
expect to
community.
find? What do you expect to find when you come early?
Yeah, so one, because of the size of the space of the venue, we're obviously in construction now, so we're kind of waiting till that phases out to know what assets we have in the space that we have.
Mm-hmm.
But what you are going to find, and what we're trying to build, is community. So we have Novant Health, Chick-fil-A as our primary sponsors, and we want people to come out to be able to enjoy their time with soccer. So players will be out on the field. You can talk to them, engage with them, meet other people from your community. One of the things that I want to implement is every section to be called out. Take a moment, meet somebody behind you. If somebody you don't know, say hi, because that's what we want to build, is that rooted community. It's not always about the product on the field, so whether win or lose, we want people to just come away feeling that they're tied in and rooted in. And so what they can find is, we work with the county on vendors, food vendors, and food selection, so that continues to be improving. There's definitely areas where we need to improve as well, but I think when you come out, I haven't yet had somebody say it's a bad experience to date. And the venues is almost 50%.
Yeah.
So
it's a beautiful venue for sure. And I promise you, I will get out and see a game soon. I do compare. I mean, I look at it as these guys who do it well, whether it's minor league baseball or if it's a USL league, or some of the USL stadiums are pretty big, but 2,500 to 5,000 square is the equivalent of your favorite artist in just a more intimate venue, right? So if you see high quality product, take the time to get out, get to know these players, and even to get to know them without the expectation that one day they may be in the MLS. Just get to know them, right? These are guys who are passionate. They play this game for the love of the game, and it comes through in their performance. And
people say, well, it's not MLS. Well, if you look at the roster, these are players that have played in the MLS. They've played at the highest level. We have one player that's played in the Champions League. We have international players that play for Trinidad and Tobago, which happened to knock off the United States. They were the team that beat the U.S. that the U.S. couldn't qualify, and we have two of their players on the roster. The quality of the game, right? I think Coach Jeffries does a great job with the brand of the game. And one thing I do want to just kind of step back is challenging partnerships. So one of the approaches that we've taken, and I've challenged our team, is don't settle for just signage. Right, it's about activation, and it's about the quality of the activation. And we met with Jason's Deli, and they're going to take an event, a sponsored position. But we sat down with them and asked them, through the model, asked them some relevant questions about how do you generate revenue, what's relevant about your brand, how do you motivate people towards purchase, personalized experience. And so we created an activation which they loved. They really, really like, and we're going to engage that in the last 10 games. So they have 6 locations here in the marketplace. And what we're going to do is once a month at a location, we're going to identify season ticket holders and invite them to come out to Jason's Deli with the players and the coaches and have an intimate meal over Jason's Deli, introduce them to the location, introduce them to our players, and then have a Q&A with the coach and players. And then we're going to take that into in-game activation with man of the match. Then that will go out on social, and then we'll do they're going to be sponsoring our distribution on email. So it's going to be narrative about nutrition, life, and sport. And so that's how we want to engage with our partners, is at a very deeper level than take the signage and run. Right.
That's good stuff. We just touched on, from a Queen City Club standpoint, one part of what you're doing, obviously. As you said, as an event management company, there's obviously what's going on with lacrosse and the Hounds in town, and maybe we'll touch on that another day. But excited for you and all that's going on down there with Queen City Football Club. I do want to ask you, though, one thing. One thing I know about you is that you also, in addition to soccer, have a passion for another. You have this passion for sports that just aren't well known in the country you live in. you have a passion for rugby
I do.
as well, and some of the stuff going on with rugby. Obviously, this past week, NFL made history a little bit. They I don't think it's the first rugby player who's come and played. I think it was a kicker or something who was doing some things, but they brought an individual. I think the Eagles drafted him.
Yeah.
In the 6th or 7th round.
270. He's a beast.
Yeah, he's a beast.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was kind of interesting. I'm sure a lot of people are like, he plays what? And then they showed the video clip of him just flat out running over people. Talk a little bit about. There's some things that have been going on with rugby. Do you?
Yeah.
Are you up on that? I mean,
yeah. So
I know that's not your focus every day, but what's going on with that?
So again, to your point, as kids growing up, we played 3 sports, right? In America, you played three sports traditionally seasonal. Where I grew up, it was cricket, rugby, and soccer.
Yeah.
And started at 6 years old playing rugby through I was 16. And what they did for the first 3 years, between 6 and 9, they don't teach you anything else but how to tackle, and how to tackle, bigger than you. And so once you have that discipline when you're 9 years old, knowing how to tackle, you're not afraid to tackle. Yeah. And so then the game becomes much free and much open and much flowing because there's no fear factor in you going into a tackle. And so that then opens up the excitement of the game, because the one thing I love about rugby as well as soccer is that the clock doesn't stop.
Yeah.
It's free flowing. Man, I tell you, it is. You just get your adrenaline going, just knowing, just the hits, the speed, the intelligence behind it. Yeah. And I think the U.S., which I've really been surprised at because of the similarities to American football, that it hasn't been adopted on a faster scale. But I do know that participation is also on the increase. It's also on the rise. The introduction, I think, of the All Blacks when they came to Chicago a few years ago, where they sold out, was, and they beat the U.S. national rugby team, 63, to something.
Yeah.
And
not a lot.
Yeah, and the All Blacks are absolutely, the standard, right? But it is the type of play, the quality of play, and again, the crowd, they're really into it. I think where we are, is that there's several leagues that are trying to get a foothold and being developed. I think they came up with recently Major League Rugby as a new one. I haven't really read much about it.
Yeah.
Pro Rugby is also out there, and they're coming into now a season. I don't know if they're still up and about.
Yeah.
And then you've got the National Rugby Football League as well, which has been a little bit in the shadows, but they're talking to venues and facilities. So so I think at the collegiate level, it's becoming more locally. It's becoming very much a local sport, and I think as people are witnessing the 7-a-side rugby, as they're coming into contact with the World Cup rugbies as well, I tell you, it will light a fire, because you have natural athletes here in the U.S. that do play it. It's like some of the football; you just have to be trained differently.
Yeah.
So
I think the most interesting part of rugby for me is that whole training it when you're young on how to tackle. I don't know the numbers, but with everything that's been thrown at us on CTE in the NFL and the seriousness of brain injury through sports.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's a lot of concussions in soccer as well. I know there's in a whole bunch of different sports, but you just don't. You watch these guys play a whole game, and you're like, somebody should have a concussion every play, with as much contact going on, and obviously they just know how to tackle the correct way.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of fun to see.
Yeah.
Listen, man, this has been good. This has been fun to do. And we'll have to. I'll give a shout out. The Independents right now are 2-2-2. So
2-2-1.
2-2-1. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So 2-2-1. So 5 games in, and then the Hounds are 2 games in, 2-0.
Yep.
Right.
2-0 with a game tonight.
So very good. So if you're in Charlotte, get out, check out the Independents and the Hounds. Chris, thanks so much for your insight, your story. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you.
Jim, thanks again for having me. And again, really appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
This has been the Market Share Sports Podcast, dedicated to helping brands maximize their sponsorships and create more engaging experiences. Visit us at marketsharesports.com to learn more about our work, catch up on past episodes, and sign up for our newsletter. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Thanks again for joining us.